Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Today I'm extremely excited because we're going to be tuning this up and actually playing it and hearing what it sounds like and all that good stuff. I'll be doing that in just a moment. After we tune it up, I'm gonna actually tear it down, meaning take the strings off, take the tuners out, put the nut in the saddle to the side, and we're gonna get this ready for finishing, sort of. We're not gonna do pour filling and all that finish prep stuff because there's something that comes before finish prep, and that's simply looking over the whole guitar and looking for little compression marks and dents and mistakes that need to be corrected now before we get to pour filling and finishing and all that. And actually, I don't even know if I am gonna pour fill. I don't know. But that's a whole separate thing. Okay, before we get started, I'm going to do what I did in the last video, and I'm going to answer your questions first. So let's do that. All right, so the first question is actually a comment, and it's a correction, which I'm very grateful for, on something I said in the last video. Keith Short says, "Hey Eric, I'm a ukulele builder, and my personal experience is that cheap ukuleles generally have friction pegs with a 1-to-1 ratio, no gears at all. 4-to-1 planetary ukulele tuners I have used are much nicer and quite stable. Goto planetary 4-to-1 tuners are usually found on higher end ukuleles, as a set of 4 tuners cost a lot more than an inexpensive ukulele," right? "I have used both 18-to-1 open gear and 4-to-1 planetary tuners. Both work fine and are stable. The planetaries are easier to install. I would not want to use 1-to-1 friction pegs as they slip and are tricky to tune. Love your stuff and appreciate you sharing your craft." Well, I appreciate you, Keith, sharing that comment there because I did make that mistake. I was comparing the tuners, the 40-to-1 tuners that I have on this guitar, these are Steinberger gearless tuners, to cheap ukulele tuners, which I said were 4-to-1 planetary tuners, and actually that's not true. 4-to-1 would be a very low tuning ratio for a guitar, but actually in the ukulele world, he's right. That's actually a decent tuner on the ukulele. The cheap tuners that I was referring to and what I was thinking of as I was saying it was exactly what he was saying, the 1-to-1 friction pegs. That means as you turn the knob, the post turns with it by the same amount. So extremely imprecise. Anyway, that's what I meant to say in the last episode. Thank you, Keith. Let's jump to the next one. What else we got here? Dave Wilson says, "Really good demo and always like your candid style. And yeah, I got the inverted reflection bit." Okay, great. Okay, I tried to explain something in the last video and I didn't think I did a very good job, but he got it. Side question. "I've been finishing using your True Oil method with good success." That's the course that I sell. Finishing with True Oil, a method for acoustic guitar. Method with good success, but that guitar looks like it has a matte finish. Is that True Oil? Okay, he's asking about this guitar that was in the last video. This is naked. There's nothing on it right now. It just looks a little shiny because of the grit it's sanded down to, which actually we're going to sand it a little shinier before we start with finishing. So you know this is not a matte finish, this is no finish for now. Okay, Thomas Tommy says, "Great video, thanks for sharing. Why did you place the tuners like that on your headstock? How does it help or hurt the guitar? It is a beautiful guitar. Do you teach people to build or work?" Well, let me take these one at a time because he's asking multiple questions. Why did you place tuners like that? So he's referring to not the type of tuners which I talked about in the last video, but the orientation of tuners. All this does is it runs the tuners, the pull of the strings, straight in a line like Paul Reed Smith. If you look at their headstock, they have a design that also gets that straight pull across. The reason that they're staggered and they look almost like they're in a random configuration, is simply that was the way to get them straight in a line, get the string pull straight in the line with this very skinny headstock shape, which was really just an aesthetic thing, making the headstock like that. I thought it would look cool to have the tuners kind of staggered like that and to have the headstock be super skinny, just to do something different. But the straight pull is a functional thing. The straight pull, at least in theory, should put more of your energy budget from that string will be put into the down pressure going into the nut and the saddle if you don't waste part of your energy budget pulling to the side, if that makes sense. So if you imagine like a normal Martin paddle headstock where all the tuners are off to the side and the string rides up to the nut and then it takes a hard turn to the side to meet the tuners. You then have two vectors that the force from the string is following. It's going down and across, whereas with the straight pull like this, it's only pulling straight down, right? I'm not a physics professor or anything, but that's how I've always understood it. It could amount to nothing. This could be one of those things that sounds good when you talk about it, but really kind of amounts to nothing. I would imagine a lot of things like that. Maybe the difference is negligible, but I like the look of it and it makes sense to me, so I do it. Other people do it for that reason. Not the weird staggered thing, but the straight pull. Other people do that and they say the same thing. So that's why. It's to get the straight pull so that there's one force vector going down against the nut instead of wasting some of that energy budget pulling out against the sides. Going on with his question comment here. Do you teach people to build or work on guitars? Yes, I do. I teach a hands-on workshop here in Burnville, Pennsylvania. It's a 9-day class. The next class is starting in March, but that class is already completely booked out. And then there's a class in April. Well, there's 2 classes in April, and there's only 1 spot in one of those 2 classes left. There's a class in May, also booked out. So spring is pretty much booked out except for that 1 April spot. And then I'm doing 3 classes in the fall. So if you go to ericschaeferguitars.com, you can see the schedule of dates there. There's spring classes and fall classes, and that's how I'm going to be doing things going forward, is always having a spring session of classes and a fall session of classes. So I won't be doing classes in the summer or the winter. So hopefully you guys can make it out to Burnville, Pennsylvania just in those seasons, the spring and the fall. Because I did this so that I can work on other things in the off season between those classes, the summer and the winter. So yeah, if you go online, you can find the schedule for that. Thank you, Thomas Tommy, and everyone else who asked questions. Yeah, that's enough questions. I'm not going to read other questions now because there's too many exciting things to do here. Like, first of all, just tuning this thing up. I'm going to use this. So you get better. Yeah, I love the precision of these tuners. It's just awesome. Before I do anything, give each of your strings a little stretch here, and that dramatically helps with, on brand new strings, with having to constantly retune them for the first, like 2 hours of playing, because those new strings are just being put into this super stressful, tensioned situation, and so they're going to constantly want to spring back and lose their tension a little bit, which means you have to retune it. You know, if you guys play guitar, which I'm sure a lot of you guys do, you're very familiar with this when you put on fresh strings. It's, you know, a back and forth of tuning and it detuning and you tuning it again. So if you do a string stretch, a couple laps, 3 or 4 passes of this, notice how I'm not just grabbing it in the middle and yanking because I don't want to put a kink in the string. I'm more so massaging the string along its full length. Okay, and then we retune it because it should have dropped down a little bit. Yeah, that definitely dropped. Try it without the pick. I love playing an open E with a new guitar, just because there's a lot of open strings on an open E, especially this open E. That one just sounds really cool. So your open strings are always going to sound fuller. They just, at the very least, they just sound different than your fretted strings, right? So if I play fretted G as opposed to the open G string, that sounds different. If I play the open E, and I play a fretted E, now here's the thing about guitar sound on new guitars. I don't put much stock. I don't think about what the guitar is going to sound like. I'm actually less excited to hear the guitar than I am to play it when it's first built like it is right now, because the sound will mature so much in even a short amount of time, in just a week, as it gets held in this tension position and everything. If you think about it, you have built this box here and it wants to resist. It's being pulled on, and in a sense it's resisting that. And just like a house settling over time, it's going to sort of give up as time goes on. And at first, the rate that it gives up is quicker than... So you'll see a change, a pretty dramatic change in just the coming weeks right after you build your guitar. And then it will continue to mature, but at a much slower rate after that, right? So it has, what would you, like an exponential curve, whatever you call that. I don't know. Anyway, so when I first string up a guitar, I'm more interested in feeling it and playing it than I am in actually listening to it. They do sound a little bit different, but they all also sound a little bit tight. So knowing that, I'm not really listening yet to hear what it sounds like, which is a little bit disappointing, you know? Because you want it to be like Christmas morning, like you're just getting this thing for the first time and hearing its full power. But You just gotta wait. Okay, so I could sit here and play this, but you guys probably don't want to see that. And also, we've got work to do. So, let's go ahead. And take this apart. Probably didn't even need to loosen that much. I could have kind of popped these out under tension. Wouldn't have been a big deal. What's interesting that I've found here is even under string tension, I have loosened up the locks on these. And maybe surprising to some of you, not so surprising to others who have dealt with these kind of mechanisms before, but you can unlock these and they don't just pop off like you would imagine they would. They're under such tension, just being curved at the edge there, the strings being curved, that they just stay in there. I'm sure if you started then playing the guitar, they would start to loosen up, maybe pop out. But it's just kind of cool that it holds like that. So all my bridge pins, by the way, I marked them with a little gel pen. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. It might be kind of hard to see in the camera. But I mark these with a gel pen at the bottom of the bridge pin where you can't see it, of course, from the outside when you're looking at the guitar. But down in the guitar, where the bridge pin is hidden, I mark which string that bridge pin is for. It's not something you need to do, but what it does do for you, you know, those bridge pins are made out of wood and they're custom fit. The bridge pin holes are custom fit to fit each one of these particular pins, and so if you, when you change strings, if you just pull all the bridge pins out and then install them in a random order, they will, when they come to tension, they will sit at kind of random heights rather than the heights that you reamed your bridge pin holes so that they would sit at. So it's just something to consider if you care about keeping those all at a consistent height and having that sort of consistent look at the bridge. Not to mention bridge pins popping out and stuff like that. But generally it's not a problem, so that's why I say you don't have to do it. Most people don't, especially just your average musician. It's really just geeky guitar maker type people such as myself and probably yourself. Okay, pull the saddle out, pull the nut out, put those to the side for safekeeping. And now these tuners have to come off. And to figure out which, there we go. You're going to loosen these little set screws here, and then this thing comes off. And then you're taking a really large washer and the nut off there, and that pops out. So it's not too bad getting these off here. And I'm going to put them in here so I don't lose all the little bits. Very easy to do. we've stripped this down, so now we can get back to working on the instrument. And you can see, by the way, the holes, or the counter bores, I mean, around the tuner holes that I talked about last time. Alright, so this is the stage of the build here where we just want to look over everything and fill in anything that needs to be filled in, pull out any compression marks or dents that need to be pulled out, just make any repairs that need to be made. So I'm going to point out a couple of these first, and then we'll get to work on them. Well, this right here is actually, I had a little crack coming off of the tuner, which I think happened from tightening down the tuner when I first put it on a little too much. And I've already repaired it with super glue, and so that just needs to be cleaned up. So that repair essentially is already done. If we look over here, this isn't really a repair so much because it wasn't a mistake. This is, I have to do this on all my guitars at this stage. The heel cap is sitting just a hair proud of the back. So I always plan out my build so that the heel cap sits a little bit proud so that it can be sanded back to be made flush with the radius of the back plate. So that'll be easy, just sanding that back. One thing I like to do at this time, I'm not sure if we'll do it today, is fill in all of the little holes underneath the tang where the fret wire is. If you had a bound fretboard, this wouldn't be an issue, but on an unbound fretboard, it just looks nice so that the finish doesn't sink into all those little holes and reveal them. You fill in the ends with black super glue. Other than that, I do have a compression mark, or a dent, you can call it, and it's a pretty big one right there. Look at that. This Port Orford cedar is a pretty soft wood, so it takes a dent pretty easily. Definitely a downside to it, of course, but it's exceptionally light, and it feels great, and it smells great. It's a good smelling wood, which probably doesn't matter to most people. Okay. You would also want to look around your binding, any of your miters and joinery, and see if there's any fills, gaps, or anything like that that you want to do. Oh, I do have one gap at the heel cap. Right now the heel cap's sitting a little high, so it doesn't reveal itself in the same way as it will after we sand this down. But there's a gap here, which you can kind of see, which is a mistake. That's from me when I routed out for my tenon. I usually build a guitar that has a slightly larger, it has less of a taper from the tail block to the neck block, and this neck block is a little bit shorter than I'm used to, and I didn't account for that when I set up my router. And so when I was cutting out that tenon, it went a little bit further than I planned for it to go, so it kind of revealed this little gap at the bottom, which I realized as I was doing it, and knew that later on this was going to be required. This is a very, very easy fix though, as you'll see. Again, black super glue is your friend. Okay, I think that's it. We're going to play around with this. Some other things might come up as I'm looking at it, and then eventually, of course, at the end I'm going to really sand everything down to 220, in some cases maybe even 320. Just going to get everything real smooth for that finish, but I might not do that on camera here today. Well, at least because we've got a lot of little cool fixes to do, and I think that'll make for a good enough video, just pulling out those dents and things like that. Okay, first let's bring the heel cap down flush with the back here. I don't know if you can tell on the camera, but this is sitting up just a little bit proud. And so Not a very sophisticated tool we'll be using here. This is just a sanding block, so you can see the 80 grit sandpaper over here. And I've stuck some tape down across this portion of it because we're going to use it like this with the tape side over here on the back, because when this is sitting up high, I don't want to just sand across like this, because I'll sand too much on the back and potentially dig in a little gully there. So that's what the tape is for, so that I won't be sanding on the back, right? But I'll still be referencing off the back. So you could take a small block and just go like this, but then it's hard to keep yourself flat in line with your reference surface back here. So using a longer block and just, you know, taping off the backside so the grit isn't digging in, that's the way to do that. If this was a lot higher, I would start with I would potentially start with a plane. So ebony can be pretty hard to plane. Sometimes it works well. It all depends on grain direction and that particular piece of ebony. Sometimes it doesn't work well. This is a little high though. Let me try working it down a little bit first. This might help a little bit. What I'm looking for is if this tears out too much, then I don't want to do it, because then I'm at risk of, you know, tearing out below my flat plane here, in which case jumping back to the abrasive tool is appropriate. But this seems okay. Yeah, this is pretty good. So I'll speed up the work a little bit with this. Tears out more in this direction, so I'm going to want to come this way. Let's just flip this around, easier for me. I'm a righty, not a lefty. Okay. Flip this back around. And now, sanding block. So, I'll do this until it gets really close, till it's basically down to the surface. And then just to blend it in so it looks super seamless, I can then take a random orbital sander and just run over both the back and the heel cap. And again, you wouldn't want to start with the random orbital sander, simply because when this is sitting up really tall, you'll just be unnecessarily digging in over on this side while it's working this down. So that's why you want to start by targeting this precisely without hitting all of this. And you know, with this Port Orford cedar neck, I got to keep reminding myself, one, not to wipe my finger on it like I just did and get ebony dust, and two, keep the ebony dust off of it while I'm working as much as I can control it. I'll keep a brush handy. Here we go. Here's a little blush brush. That'll work. So that's basically down flat with the surface. This would be the point where I would take out the random orbital sander. But before I do that, let's go ahead and kill two birds with one stone. There's this little gap here that I mentioned earlier. And what we're going to do is fill that in with black super glue. Okay, you can tell that this bottle has at some point completely exploded and gotten everywhere, and hopefully that doesn't happen to me again. I remember when that happened. That was a mess. Okay, we like to avoid that. So, a couple things that help with that. One is these little whip tips on here. And, I don't know, just being very careful with the bottle. So, this is going to be different than a gap fill, like, say, around the binding somewhere, where you'd actually want to fill the gap completely. Like, if the super glue sinks down, which it tends to do, you would then fill it again and keep filling it till it gets to the top. The thing with this is essentially bottomless. You can keep filling this and it'll just keep bleeding down into the neck joint, because this opens up all the way into the neck joint. So what we actually want to do is place a dab of this in there. This is a number 20 glue, which means it's kind of like medium thick. It's not the water thin number 10 stuff, so it's not going to just suck right down into the joint like the number 10 would. It's a little bit more viscous than that, so it'll hold for a second, just long enough to give it a hit with the accelerator so that it'll essentially freeze itself in place, giving us a nice surface that we can build more super glue on top of, instead of letting it endlessly sink down into that joint. Right? Make sense? So, go ahead and we want to be kind of quick with this. Now, these accelerator bottles, I don't know what happened here at Stu Mac, but they used to be great. Now, for some reason, they changed them a little bit, and I just cannot control the amount that comes out of these. It's always way too much, so you got to hold it up really far away from the workpiece, which you sort of always have to do anyway, because you don't want to spray this. You don't want to flood this with accelerator, because what that can do is the super glue can bloom, which is when it basically turns that whitish color. They use the word bloom because it kind of expands outward and turns white. So we don't want either of those two things to happen, especially the white part, because it can kind of ruin the look of what you're trying to do if you're using it as a fill. So you want to make sure you don't overdo the accelerator, which again, Stu Mac making it kind of hard to do with these new bottles. Just doesn't have the control. So if you're listening out there, Stu Mac, I'm pissed. No, I'm just kidding. Alright. Hold this up a little further. There we go, that was a little better. We can get some of the excess off there. But yeah, it's very important to get that accelerator on there with that first dollop of glue you're putting in there. You want to get that accelerator on there quick. And actually, I can see it's still sinking in a little bit. Way too much accelerator. Okay, now that that's filled in, we can jump to the random orbital sander. Alright guys, I had my camera battery die on me and I failed to have a backup ready for me like I should have. So we missed a couple things here. I had to keep working while the battery was charging, and I'll show you what I did. So I went ahead and filled those gaps underneath the fret tangs. And the way to do that simply is to drop your super glue right underneath the fret tang. It'll suck down into that gap, and what you want to do is just take a sanding block while the super glue, the black super glue, is still wet and viscous, and before it gets pulled down in there, you just take this block, so you got to have it like right at your side so it's ready to go, and you just sand that super glue in there. You can see these black streaks of hardened dust here. That's where I sanded with the super glue. So in that way the super glue is mixing with the dust, and which makes it thicker and helps trap it and keep it from just continuing to pull itself down further down that slot. If you just let it pull down the slot, it's very likely to travel all the way to the other side and just make a mess of your neck. You really don't want to make a big hot super glue mess here. It's not good, trust me. So yeah, it's a little bit different from what we did on the heel cap, where we used the accelerator. In this case, you don't want to use the accelerator there. It makes way too much of a mess. There's too many individual holes, and it doesn't really catch the super glue before it gets pulled down the slot. So the way to go is sanding block. Drop your super glue, sand it. Keep on going down the line. Yeah, the next thing I want to show you guys, where I want to work on, is that little dent we have here on the neck, where I must have leaned it against something while I was working on it. Port Orford cedar is a soft wood, easy to dent. Also, believe it or not, easy to fix. So we're going to take a regular soldering iron here. I'm going to plug that in right now so it can take a moment to get hot. Make sure you're not resting this against anything that's, you know, combustible, or that you don't want to leave a burn mark on, because that gets super hot. Okay, I've got that safely handled right there. Next thing I'm going to need is just a piece of cardboard. Okay? And what we're going to do is wet this cardboard just like that, and it's good to have a nice little square edge of the cardboard here, because I'm going to use that part of the cardboard to steam out this dent. And that's simply because by only using that little tip, I can target the dent really accurately, whereas if I just used like the middle of this cardboard piece, I would be concealing where the dent is, and it would be hard for me to accurately pinpoint with my soldering iron that dent, because we don't want to heat the whole surrounding area. We want to target the dent and a little bit of the surrounding area. While that's heating up, I'm going to take this and just lightly dab the dent to get some moisture in there. And you can always check your soldering iron by spraying it. See that? Oop, I wasn't on camera. Let me try that again. So that's good and hot. And you don't need to stay on it, or you don't want to stay on it for a long time. What you want to do is place this there and then just drag it across that area gently. And you can see it's already pulling out that dent. I need a little more moisture on my piece of cardboard. And you can just keep doing this until it pulls it out. At some point, if it doesn't pull it out completely, which often it does, but if it doesn't pull it out completely, You might reach a point where you're not really making any more progress. That means the dent has pulled out as much as it will. And again, usually that's all the way, but sometimes it's just shy of that. If it doesn't pull out at all, then it's not a dent. That means you have a tear out. You've actually lost the chunk of wood that was in there. In the case of an actual dent, you haven't lost any wood, you've just compressed it. Alright, so we're going to give that a minute. It'll actually continue to pull out, and then we'll just sand it back. If it doesn't pull out 100%, we can just blend it in with sandpaper, and it'll disappear in that way. Okay, that looks really good. I think we can just sand that back now, and you won't have ever known that it was there. Well, you will, because you watched this video. You don't need any heavy grit for this, of course. 220 or even 320. Just to blend in the area, smooth it all out, and to what you did there with the moisture is going to have raised up the grain a little bit, so it's also going to knock that back down to use your fine grit sandpaper on a soft block. Okay, that dent is gone. What you're seeing there, because you can still see something there, is just all this stupid ebony dust that gets caught into the pores, and it's just a pain to get out. A mixture of fine sanding and using solvents cleans that up, but we're not at that stage yet. So because we're going to keep working on this guitar, we're only going to put more ebony dust in there. So I'm going to save that for the real end right before finishing to actually clean that up. I think for the most part now I'm just going to start breaking edges and smooth sanding, preparing the surfaces for finish sanding. Breaking the surfaces, let's talk a little bit about that. Even though I'm not going to start with that. I'm going to start sanding the surfaces, but I think I'm going to conclude this video pretty soon. So I'll talk about breaking the edges first. Number one, you need to break the edges because finish doesn't cling well to an edge. So it's not just aesthetic that we want to break these edges just a little bit. It's also functional so that the finish, you won't have issues at that really hard 90 edge. And by breaking the edge, I really just mean, hold on one sec, let me grab, here we go, a piece of 220 or even 320. I often use 320 for this. Very fine grit sandpaper, and you're just something like that. It's really not much at all. I mean, it's up to your taste. You could round over more or less, but I find it doesn't look good if they're very rounded over. I don't even like to use the term rounded over. I think of it as breaking the edge, because you're not, it shouldn't be this visible round so much as just a softening of the edge. And that's it. I mean, that's all breaking the edges is. But I'm probably doing this a little too soon because I am going to sand more on here. If I remove a lot of wood through sanding, then I may need to break the edges again. So there's no reason to do that before I've progressed through the grits on all my surfaces. So that's what I'm going to do next. And for doing that kind of work, it's good to have a mixture of different kinds of blocks. So first of all, I have different hardnesses of blocks. This foam block here is actually pretty stiff and hard, so it makes a good flat sanding block for my large surfaces. But then I also have, this is like a medium soft block. You can see that it's pretty soft. I can move it around. And then this one is really soft. Okay? And without getting too much into details, I mean, once you start doing this yourself, you'll realize that there are situations where you need a very soft block. The heel is a good example of that. And situations where you need sort of a medium, somewhere in between, semi-soft block. Like this one, for example, I use here on these curves of the headstock. So especially if you know you're going to be making the same type of guitar a lot, like say you have a very special headstock shape like I have here, you can make little blocks that are purpose-built just for different parts of your guitar and just have them all in a little bin, so when you get to this stage you don't have to think too much about it. You have sort of a collection of blocks for all the different, you know, situations that come up on your guitar. Another one I have, just to give you another example, is this little guy, which has the edges beveled away, and this is literally just for getting right up here on the side of the fretboard tongue. Just like that. You can also use this on the side of the bridge. My bridge is good right now, so I don't want to sand on that. But yeah, it's good to have specialty blocks for all of this work. Anyway, I'm going to conclude this right here. I think we've talked about enough. I thank you guys for tuning in and hanging out with me. And that's all I have to say. I'll talk to you guys later. Take care. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.